Hello there, and welcome to another Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and today on the show, a very special panel of authors. I say this almost every week because we have special authors every single week, but this time we have a panel. We haven't had one in a long time. The authors today, they express themselves quite differently in terms of genre, style, and avatars. I hope that the camera gets a chance. Well, we'll get a lot of chances to look at them. I'm sitting next to a rock monster. Who knows what the deal is with this guy? But one thing they have in common, these authors, they're all published by the Parliament House Press. And the Parliament House Press, according to their website, is a boutique publisher of the brilliantly bizarre. And I have to agree 100%. I read 3 books this week, and it was a wonderful discovery process. Um, the the genres that were covered is, I don't know if it's fantasy parody or comedic fantasy. We'll find out what Sean Gibson writes. Steampunk, cosmic horror, everything in there. We have 2 debut authors today. I can never pronounce the word debut. Bear with me, I'm a foreigner. Their novels are coming out in May and August, and I would like to welcome, starting from the far left, Nicole Willson, author of Tidepool. Next to her is Emily Wright, author of Sedition. And then on my side of the stage, next to me is Sean Gibson, the author of The Part About the Dragon Was Mostly True. Now, how is everyone? And let me just say, if we talk over each other, that's really not a problem. Don't worry about that. We're not on Zoom here, thank God. But let's do the rounds. Nicole, how are you? How do you feel in your avatar form?
I feel great. I feel creepy. I'm ready to go.
You're the horror writer here, and you
That's right.
resemble a little bit. Now that I just finished your book, you do resemble the one person that we won't spoil what her role is. Your book is full
Thank
of
you.
a very good woman and a kind of a bad one, but there's also
Hmm.
nuance in between.
Yes, yes. I would agree with that.
Next to Nicole is Emily. Emily, how are you feeling? There's something with your arm.
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm dressed up as my main character here, so that's kind of exciting. Happy to be here.
And next to me is the rock guy. How are you feeling?
I'm torn between being really turned on looking at myself right now and being really turned on looking at my female counterpart in the audience. This is amazing. I mean, I've literally never looked this good, so I'm pretty excited to be here.
Let's cam in the audience because, as a matter of fact, your character Borgunder has a female counterpart, not in your book, but in the audience. She stands a little bit at the back here. Maybe she's somewhat shy. Borgunda Gunda Berger, if the camera could pull back, she's just right next to the door, waiting for you to get off stage after the show. Um, so each of your avatars, as we have established, is reflecting a little bit of the theme of the book. And I'm contractually obligated to remind everybody that you cannot do this on Zoom. Thank you, Linden Lab. Now, uh, I'm going to do a very quick housekeeping notes, and then we're going to start diving right into what the books are about, and hopefully also learn about a little bit about the craft and about how you guys deal with creative anxieties. I'm always interested. And let me also say, folks in the room, please put your questions in the chat. If I miss them, don't hesitate and just cut and paste. I'm looking at it, but I'm also monitoring the YouTube chat. So if it goes by fast, just cut and paste it. I'll pick it up. So quick housekeeping notes, Book Club Island is open 24/7. We have about 200 people come through here every day. We have a whole bunch of different platforms, different worlds to explore. And on the 3,000-meter level is an entire gallery of all the 50 plus authors that have visited us so far since April. The main show is every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, except when we have people from a different time zone on. Sometimes it's at 5 o'clock. The show is produced by Strawberry Linden and myself. Associate producer and researcher is Shyla, the Super Gecko. Location manager, prop master, and master builder, Ruby Geek, she put this. The castle was built by Solus, but Ruby Geek really put it all together. We have a lot of farm animals around here. I have no idea how we came up with this idea. So it's we attempted to put different things that reflect the genres horror, steampunk, and in the case of Sean Gibson, uh, fairy tales of farm animals, I suppose, or dragons or whatever he writes about.
Whatever the hell it is you write about, Sean. Yeah, I get it. Thanks.
That's the subtitle of today's show, Sean. Other contributors to the island: Marianne McCann, Arden Schwartzman, Theanine A.J. McDowell. Avatars are customized by Kralos. Sometimes they're built from scratch by Silas Merlin. Big thanks to Brett and Patch from Linden Lab and all the molds over there. And of course, the biggest thanks goes to our authors, our guests, and the wonderful community of book lovers here. I say it every week. And to conclude this housekeeping, I'll pick up a book today, and I'll be repeating this. If we want books to be around, we also need to actually purchase them or get them from the library. Now, I thought I'm going to be the timekeeper today. A panel is always a little bit challenging. So to start off with, let's pretend I am a publisher and you guys are pitching me your books. And try to be brief. And I may ask because I'm pretending to be a publisher, I may ask an ignorant follow-up question. So let's do a little role play. Let's see here. Should we start with? Let's start with Sean. So Sean, knock knock. He's knocking on my door, and I say, Sean Gibson, you have published before. What are you pitching today? This book about the dragon. What is this about?
Let me ask you first. Are you drunk? And if you're not, would you like to be?
You're bringing bribes. I see.
No, I'm glad you asked because I'm here with the opportunity of a lifetime for you. The part about the dragon was mostly true is what happens when high fantasy meets behind the music meets 30 Rock. Right, so it's this
Wow.
Epic story of a brave group of heroes who band together to save a beleaguered town from a dragon. Only it turns out that that's not exactly the way things happened, and the adventuring life is a lot messier, less eventful, confusing, and smelly than one might otherwise assume. And so we get the real story behind the story of this legend that's very well known in the world in which the book takes place. Compliments of Heloise the Bard, who is the storyteller and was also present for the events in question. So she sort of wrote the epic poem that the bards tell in the taverns about the story, but was also there when it actually happened and is now telling the full, very often gross and smelly truth about the events that transpired.
This is awesome, Sean. And I will say many times today, I enjoyed every one of your books. I mean, it really it was a wonderful week of reading, and the way you summarize this totally makes sense to me with the 30-year-old put in there. I would also add it's sort of an unapologetic. I think I said you this earlier, an ode to dad jokes. You may say fart jokes, but it is so super funny, and there is. I told some of these lines my wife, and she kind of cringed a little bit. I think that's a good sign that your spouse may not find that funny. Actually, let me ask you a specific question. How do you know if you're funny? Because I think you are. I mean, in that context, I mean, where do you have? This is a serious question. How do you have someone in your house or someone who says like, you got to tweak it here a little bit, or are you walking away and sleeping over it a couple times and then go back to the lines?
I think, first of all, I want to have your spouse may not find this funny as a pull quote on the back of my next book, if you'll allow me to do that. I think that's a great endorsement. But no, it's a good question. Funny is so subjective, right? And ultimately, I think, whether you're writing something funny or scary or suspenseful, you need to write something that you enjoy, right?
Mhm.
And I love that mix of, Monty Python's a good example, that mix of sort of very very clever wordplay and ridiculously lowbrow slapstick humor.
Mhm.
And so as I'm writing, if I'm making myself laugh, which I realize is a pathetic sight, like the thought of me in a coffee shop giggling as I write, fart jokes, is probably probably tells you more about me than you need to know. But if I can read that back and I'm like, you know what, that's funny. I know that there's going to be some small subset of people who dig the same stuff I do that are going to like it, and there's going to be a lot
Mhm.
of people who don't, and that's okay, right? I'm
Mhm.
not writing this for everybody. I'm writing this for the subset of people who enjoy this kind of thing, and if they dig it, that's great. And if they don't, that's fine too.
Now, Emily, I want to go to you. Actually, I want to start with Nicole because then Emily is going to do the first reading. We're going to have 3 readings today. Um, so Nicole, how about you? How would you pitch this to me? Again, I'm an extremely intimidating publisher of a huge publishing house, and Nicole, you are a first-time author. You're coming to
Oh,
me, and you're a woman, and you're wait a minute, I'm already angry because you're a woman writing Lovecraftian horror. What's going on? The
oh,
audacity.
okay. I had pitched this as Lovecraftian cosmic horror meets American Horror Story. And my story is about, it's set mostly in 1913. A gentleman named Henry Hamilton disappears while he's on a business trip. His younger sister, Sorrow, is determined to find out what happened to him. And so she travels to Tidepool, since that's the last place that he was known to have been. And she wants to find out whatever she can about his disappearance. And when she gets there, it's a very small town where the townspeople really don't want to talk to her. They act very much as if they're hiding something. They pretend they don't know what happened to Henry, but she doesn't believe them. And she eventually meets the most intimidating resident of the town named Ada Oliver. And from there on, she finally learns the true secret that the town is hiding.
Hmm. One follow-up question. I'm intrigued, Mrs. Wilson, Miss Wilson. Um, what can women write horror though?
Oh, yes. You better believe it. Yes. um, I
Why?
think I I think a lot of it is that I actually had talked about this on another panel a couple of weeks ago. It was like, I think a woman in the world is already experiencing a certain amount of horror every day, just being told, don't talk to that man, don't take that drink a stranger hands you, don't wear that. And so we already feel a certain amount of threat even before you start throwing cosmic monsters into the mix. So, yes, I
Mhm.
believe we've got a perspective that will definitely lend itself well to horror writing.
Wonderfully put. Um, Emily, how about you? What's your book about?
So
Why
I've
should I publish it? Hold on, I gotta role play better. Why should I publish this Sedition? What is this about?
so I've pitched mine as Philip Reeve meets If Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And it's
Oh.
this alternate London steampunk world where airships rule the skies over London, and there are clockwork cyborgs who are essentially slaves. And it's about one girl and her attempt to hide what she is so that she can live a normal life, and what happens when a mysterious privateer interrupts all that and says, I know what you are.
Hmm.
Mm.
Super intriguing, and because I have read it and now the role play stops, and I'll ask you a follow-up a little later after the reading. I mean, to me, I work a lot with the disability community, and to me, I mean, the biomatons, as they're called in your book, they are slaves. They're used to do manual labor. It's also related to Rossum's Universal Robots. We had an author on a few weeks ago from the Czech Republic, and we were talking about Rossum's Universal Robots, which is 100 years ago. And if people don't know it, we'll link to the show back then. But those biomatons, they also, to me, they seem that you're making a big statement on how we treat people with disabilities. Was that in the back of your mind too?
Um, I think a lot of those parallels, you can draw a lot of parallels with the biomatons and different groups that they could relate to. I didn't intentionally write to make a comment on something in our world. I wrote this fantastic other world that sort of came from somewhere in the darkest reaches of my mind. But I think if you're writing fiction and you aim to tell the truth through your fiction, you're going to have those parallels,
Yeah.
however unintentional they may be.
I think that's really great that you say that, because it also shows that the reader, that, I mean, we talk about this every week, that the book becomes it's a collaboration between the writer and the reader. I mean, I read that stuff in there. For me, those slaves, they're missing limbs, and then their limbs are being replaced with very elaborate prostheses, and the fact that somebody works on them immediately disqualifies them from being human. I mean, that's such a powerful part of your story, and I had to think about, like, this is how quote unquote normal people treat people who are ability diverse. So we'll talk about that later. I want to pick up here there's a few comments in the chat already. Oh, there's a lot of those. For Sean, Wyomao says, is the name of Erythea based on the country Eritrea or Douglas Adams' planet Magrathea or something else? That's where your story takes place, Sean.
It is, and the truth is, it's based on the first random word that sort of sounded like a word that popped into my head. I'd like to say it's deeper than that, but it's really not.
If you're just tuning in, you're tuned into the Second Life Book Club, where authors reveal that they actually have absolutely no plan whatsoever. They just take a blank piece of paper and they fill it with stuff. No?
Okay, unfair. There is a plan. It's not a good one, but there is a plan.
Yes, you start this. This is probably the most enjoyable panel, and I really have to restrict myself not to get on. If Sean and I were in the same physical space, maybe with a little bit of beer, I don't think it would end well. But then again, I don't drink. So let's do some reading here, and I would like to have actually Emily start reading, and I'm going to bring up the little book display. Emily, if I could ask you to attempt to walk forward where the book display is. So let me bring this up here from underneath. And if you're falling off the, well, yes, we established that you cannot fall off the stage.
Let's see if my leg will allow me to walk to the front of the stage there.
Oh, wait a minute. We don't have the proper book in here, so I have to take a trick. This is Tidepool here. Who put up Tidepool?
It wasn't me, I swear.
Who put Tidepool up here, Nicole?
I didn't do it.
Well.
It wasn't me.
Emily, don't worry about it. This is good, and I'm going to bring up the book. I'll put this in front of you, but let us know now, what are we hearing? Set up the scene for us. I believe that's from the beginning.
Yeah, this is chapter 1. It's just a little bit of an introduction to the world and the characters, and sort of this first moment where you get to know how the world is constructed.
Okay, and this is Emily reading from Sedition and not from Tidepool.
Hopefully. If you will follow me, there is much more to see. The students of Grafton's School of Mechanics followed their guide deeper into the newly opened London Museum of Bioclockwork. The building was huge, regal in a bare, industrial sort of way. Their footsteps clattered across a stone floor inlaid with metal gilding, copper cogs elevated from functional to beautiful. The students crowded together in their crisp school uniforms, daunted by the imposing glory of the soaring building. The group consisted of boys and young men, all bright-eyed, eagerly soaking up the information presented before them, and looking forward to the bright future they would have as clockmakers or mechanics. Or, if they were very fortunate, as biomechanics. But near the back of the group, The crinkle of crinoline and the sweep of a bustled skirt could be heard. A fierce-looking girl with a shock of bright red hair pulled into a tangled braid stood, her arms crossed, one hand covered with a black satin glove. Her expression was stony, somewhere between blank and cross. Beside her, a boy with unkempt, dirty blonde hair and a face that appeared to smile too much bounced from foot to foot, trying to see over the heads of the other students. Bioclockwork was first introduced to the field of mechanics in the early 1820s, when a man named Vincenzo Doltevi created a clockwork hand for himself after losing his own in a factory accident. Little did Mr. Doltevi know that his innovation would lead to the creation of a race who would become the laborers of the British Empire. Slaves, the red-haired girl muttered to her friend. He glared and elbowed her teasingly. "Shh, Taryn," he whispered. "If you follow me this way." The guide directed them into a hallway filled with glass cases. Huge glass windows on both sides of the hall let in plenty of light, and immense chandeliers dripping with candles illuminated any shadowy places that remained. "Look around, gentlemen, and you will see just a sampling of some of the most detailed biomechanics available today," the guide intoned, his voice echoing in the space. The tight-knit group scattered across the polished floor to various glass cases, murmuring and marveling at the objects they found inside. The red-haired girl held back, her face seemingly set in stone. Had anyone been watching closely, he might have noticed she was struggling not to display any emotion in her countenance. Her friend eagerly moved toward the nearest glass case, one freestanding on the floor with a pedestal inside. The girl followed him after only a few moments of hesitation, as though they were bound together by an invisible rope and it had pulled taut, dragging her along. Within the glass case, on the pedestal, stood an intricate clockwork leg built from the knee down. The metal plating had been removed on one side, revealing the intricate mechanical workings within. The girl stared not at the clockwork display, but rather at the metal exterior plating of the prosthetic. It was scratched and scuffed, dented and worn. This was not something built for display. This was a true prosthetic. It had been worn by someone at some point before finding its way into this case. The girl paled ever so slightly and lifted her gloved left hand to her chest as if to cradle it. The boys scattered throughout the museum soon congregated in front of a large glass case at the far end of the hall. They murmured amongst themselves, the sound hushed and awed. The red-haired girl and her friend were drawn along with the crowd, unable to resist their own curiosity. They shoved their way to the front, ignoring the indignant taunts of their classmates. When they reached the front of the crowd, both students froze in their tracks. The red-haired girl's hand went to her mouth, the color draining from her face. She looked as though she might swoon. Behind the glass lay a boy, strapped to a wooden board like a dead beetle, his arms splayed, his head tilted back, jaw hanging, slightly ajar. The boy's chest had been cut open, displaying a mess of gears and flesh. It was abundantly clear that the boy was dead, but for the first moment or two of observation, he appeared to still be breathing. The red-haired girl turned, shoved through the crowd, and fled from the hall. Her hand was still pressed to her mouth.
And that's Emily Wright reading from Sedition, which is out in, refresh my memory, either in May or August.
May 18th.
Applause, big round of applause. Fantastic. Please take a seat, Emily. That was wonderful reading. So these biomatons, as you can see, they're enhanced humans, and they're treated like slaves. And the narrative is this alternate history playing in that time frame of the early 20th century. This is also the first of a series. So Emily, I was wondering, is this also something that you have to pitch as a series, or you say like, hey, I got this idea, and then down the line you realize, hey, wait a minute, these characters, this is a world that I'm creating here with airships and these cyborgs, and the mechanics, that the clockwork mechanics, and also I should say very strong female characters, because the main character is not only an enhanced human, and therefore should, would be barred from pursuing anything, but she's also a woman who are usually not in the engineering trade. So this is also pretty cool. But this whole series, did you conceptualize this as a series from the beginning?
I think when I first started writing it, I didn't realize it was a series. But I have all three books, at least drafted. I know how the whole story goes from beginning to end. So when I pitched it to the Parliament House, I already knew it was a trilogy. I already had all three of those books in my head.
Hmm.
And there are things in the first book that definitely get pulled through and lead you into those other two books.
How about the I mean, the strong female character, the character that is wants to pursue a career? How did that come up? Was that something that is important to you to transport? I mean, there's a
Hmm.
commonality also, interestingly enough, in the book that's written by the only man here on the panel, is also kind of a go-getter female character, the Bard Heloise. But yeah, Emily, how about that? Writing those characters. I mean, it's a very obvious question, I think, because I would assume that you want to see people like that. I mean, they're extremely inspirational. That they pursue these dreams of becoming engineers rather than whatever, married off, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, so a lot of my favorite books as a kid were um, books with strong boy leads, but those were the kinds of things I wanted to read, these like strong adventure novels, and they all had boy leads. And I think I'm sort of writing for myself and my younger self and getting to see that strong female lead who doesn't necessarily want to just be what society expects her to be, but
Hmm.
also looks at all of that and says, I can be more, and I don't just have to be a wife. I don't just have to be this like at home figure, but I can also be more than that, and that's okay.
Hmm. I have a question here in the chat. Emily, did I read that your soon-to-be released book has Attack of Cosmic Horror? I think that's Nicole.
Yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's Nicole's book.
Yeah, yeah, we'll talk about that. And Cosmic Horror, we actually had several shows on Lovecraft and Lovecraftian horror and cosmic horror, the relationship, and why H.P. Lovecraft was, you know, kind of an a-hole and a very problematic person, but nonetheless influenced so many people in popular culture. We'll revise that topic. Maybe we'll do a special topic on that with a whole bunch of guests. So now, I have another idea here. Sean and Nicole, what is the number one question that you would like to ask Emily about her work?
That's
Um,
Go ahead.
okay. I was just wondering, who are your reading influences in steampunk? There's a lot of good authors. I was wondering if there's anybody in particular who inspired
Ah,
you.
Hmm. I started drafting this book just after I read Leviathan by Scott
Ah.
Westerfeld.
Mm-hmm.
And it's come a long way since then, and Leviathan is obviously more diesel punk. But I did a lot of reading as well in like the Victorian authors, so a lot of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and a lot of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, to give me both inspiration for voice and then also to make sure that I was being sort of authentic while still changing everything about the past.
this is awesome. Can I ask someone in the chat, please, if you could repeat the name of the author that you mentioned, the contemporary author, and somebody please in the audience look that up and put a link here. We're actually recording the chat here, so I can put that on the website as well, so that we don't lose those types of recommendations.
Hmm.
And diesel punk. Oh my God, I'm learning. So I don't know anything about this stuff. Crazy. Sean, what's your question for Emily?
My question is, as a giant nerd who was a Victorian lit major in undergrad, and believes that 5 words are always better when one would do otherwise. Do you find it hard to kind of get in that mindset when you're writing? If there's distractions around, like, I know it's hard to find that quiet space to write. I think it's especially hard when you're writing things that are happening in times and places that either are not now or never existed.
Mhm.
Do you have to have a certain place or process to get into the right mindset to get into that linguistic rhythm?
What's really funny is I actually drafted most of Sedition as it exists now during lectures in college. Um,
Awesome.
Hey.
so the answer would be no. But now going back and revising, after having I've written a cyberpunk novel and then a science fiction novel. It's really hard to go back and sort of feel out that voice again and try to find it. So I have to like reread what I've written and then put on a playlist and sort of get back into that mindset when I'm revising.
That's actually a question I also have for later. What are the writing tips? Where do you guys write? How do you structure your day? I know Sean also has children. That's always a challenge to find that quiet space. But now we know if you're in college, that's how you can write really good novels by not paying attention. I get it.
I love that.
Widget says in the local chat here, reminded of the world-building strong adolescent female protagonist in Sherry Tepper's 9 True Game novels. Widget, look that up, please, and put a link in the chat, and I'll collect all those. I would now like to go for reading to Nicole here, and Nicole, I'm going to move the book display here to you, so you don't have to get up.
Okay, thank you. It'll take an hour for me to come to the stand.
This is what we do here at the book club. We share absolutely no expense in moving digital pixelated items in front of our guests.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I will even change the cover. So now we're hearing from Tidepool, and I believe it's a scene where the father, and this is really interesting because the main character, her name is Sorrow, and she was named by the father because the mother died at childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he's
Does
an
this
interesting
guy ever
fellow.
redeem him? Yes, interesting. Okay, sorry, you set up the scene. Go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, yes, this is when Sorrow's brother has been missing for a couple of weeks, and she is determined that she's going to go find him, and her father Winslow does not want her to do that. So this is how that goes down, basically.
And so she's young, and again, this is a similar thing where this plays in 1913, as we established earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and Sora is very independently minded, and the father says no, but she says, I got to look for my missing brother, who is kind of a real estate developer. So
Right,
go ahead.
right. Okay, thank you. Sorrow Hamilton, October 1913. Winslow Hamilton absolutely forbade his daughter Sorrow to travel in search of her missing brother. She stood in front of the elaborate oak desk in his study, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling like a naughty student being called on the carpet. The odor of stale pipe smoke, a smell she had grown to detest, hung heavy in the air of the study. It is unsafe for young ladies to travel alone, Sorrow, he said, frowning and folding his arms over his chest, and unseemly. I'm 21, for God's sake, Sorrow thought, but did not dare say. He can't stop me if I want to go. But that isn't true. Betsy Muller travels solo all the time and has come to no trouble. She studied the neat piles of paper arranged on Winslow's desk, digging her fingernails into her palms and trying to hold back her rising temper. Bully for Betsy Muller. She is not my daughter. You are. Sorrow had known this would be difficult. Winslow had very firm ideas on what young ladies could and could not do, and his could not list was considerably longer and included many of the things that most interested Sorrow, things such as traveling on one's own without a relative or other companion. She sometimes considered it a small miracle that Winslow had allowed her to attend college. His belief in the importance of education overrode his idea that Sorrow was best kept at home until a suitable husband swept her off her feet. Women were likely to get the vote before much longer, Winslow said. and an educated voter was a better bet for the future of the United States. But this was about Henry. Her father couldn't expect her to just sit in the house while her brother was still missing. I must know what's happened to Hal. It's been over 2 weeks. He wouldn't simply vanish like this with no word to us. Winslow fixed her with a glare. Sorrow often thought that Winslow's steel gray eyes and matching hair suited his personality perfectly. He had all the warmth of a slab of granite as he stared up at her. I know that perfectly well, and I am as concerned as you are. But what exactly do you think you'll be able to discover in that place? Sorrow raised her chin as she stared down at her father. Whatever there is to know. Winslow shook his head. I've been speaking with some investigators. Those men have the knowledge and the experience to find out where he is. That is no role for you, and I won't have you running off to God knows where trying to find him. I do not need to be searching for 2 missing children. With that, Winslow turned from Sorrow and busied himself with some paperwork on his desk, his favored way of telling his daughter that a discussion was over. Sorrow fought the temptation to slam the door of his study as she left. Slamming doors was something else young ladies didn't do. But whatever he thought, Winslow was not winning this argument. Henry had looked after Sorrow her whole life. While Winslow seemed to hold Sorrow responsible for her mother's death in childbirth and kept a chilly, reserved distance, Henry made sure she was washed, well-dressed, and entertained. In the schoolyard, he'd fight any children who made fun of her name. He helped her with her schoolwork and listened to her confidences. When she was old enough to understand why she'd been named Sorrow, Henry reassured her that their mother's sad fate was in no way her fault, and he bore her no grudge. Sorrow considered her brother the only true parental figure of her life, and her best friend as well. If she had dropped out of contact for over 2 weeks while traveling, Henry would have moved heaven and earth to find her. This she knew as well as she knew her own name. And she would do no less for him, whether father liked it or not. No detectives knew Henry the way she did. She'd be able to think like her brother, to imagine what he might have been drawn to that could account for his silence now. The last she had heard from Henry was a short letter to her and Winslow, telling them that he had arrived in Tidepool. Not sure what on earth Charlie sees in this place. Shabby, smells like a load of dead fish. Looking forward to leaving. He wasn't on the steamer back to Baltimore on the day he'd arranged for Sorrow to meet him at the pier, and he sent along no explanation for his absence. None of his friends or colleagues had heard anything from him, and as the days rolled on without any word, his silence grew more ominous. Henry had been known to extend a trip by a few days if he met interesting people to travel with, or if he had been particularly taken with the place. But try as she might, Sorrow could come up with no situation in which Henry would have stretched out his trip so long without getting word to them. Perhaps he'd sent them a message that had gotten lost somewhere along the line. Perhaps he'd walk into the house any day now wondering what the fuss was. Sorrow could no longer stand the suspense. Since Tidepool was the last place where Sorrow had received any news from Henry, Tidepool was where she would start looking for him. Maybe someone there had learned of whatever plans he might have had. Why Henry might tell this mysterious someone his plans without notifying his own family, Sorrow didn't know. But she intended to find out. The next day, as soon as Winslow departed for his office, Sorrow slipped into Hal's bedroom, which was beginning to feel colder and emptier as the days passed without his return. His chair sat pushed back from his desk and turned towards the door as if he jumped up to greet someone with great eagerness. Sorrow couldn't bring herself to put the chair back in its proper place, and so she remained standing. A map of Maryland sat unfolded over his desk. Tidepool, such a small dot on the map that Sorrow had to strain her eyes to see it, looked to be a brief, straightforward buggy ride from Ocean City. If she took the 6:15 a.m. boat to Claiborne and made the connection to the train to Ocean City, she could potentially be in Tidepool by late afternoon. She folded the map up and took it from her brother's room. The following morning, well before the sun rose, Sorrow edged out of bed, got dressed as quietly as she could manage, and left a note by her father's place, sitting in the dining room. Dearest father, please don't be angry. I am going to Tidepool, and I shall not leave until I get answers to at least some of my questions about Hal. I will keep you informed of anything I learn. I'm sure you will understand that I simply cannot rest until I have some clue as to where he might be now. Despite her conciliatory words, Sorrow doubted very much that Winslow would understand her actions. She held her breath and took slow, careful steps as she eased her small suitcase down the stairs and out of the house. She hurried to Pier 8 at Light Street and tried to blend into the waiting crowd, her hat pulled low over her head. She hoped that it was still dark enough that spotting her in the throng of travelers would be difficult, especially if father decided to rise early, today of all days, and found her note. After all the passengers had boarded the steamer and it began its roll out of the harbor, Sorrow turned her back on the pier. She feared she might see Winslow running along the docks, his red face contorted in fury as he pursued her, intending to leap onto the boat and drag his daughter back to land. But as the steamer picked up speed and Baltimore's tall buildings gave way to rolling farmlands and water under a rising sun, her fear of Winslow abated, and she smiled. She had done it. She was traveling alone for the first time in her life. Something inside her soared, even if the reason for her trip troubled her deeply. I'm coming, Hal. Please be there. Please be all right. And that's it.
That is Nicole Willson reading from Tidepool, a woman, moving outside of the station that other people have decided she should be in, and she goes on this journey, and the journey is also pretty darn bloody at some point. I'm actually I'm curious because I thought you would. I mean, this book is so fantastic, but I thought that you would actually read something where it gets really bloody. But I guess I asked you this before about what no, I mean, this sets it up really nicely. I mean, this sets up the suspense, and you set it up so well. And then when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, I'm spelling out the shit word as we did when our son was little. He's 25. No, he's 17. The horror. What were you? Is there a stigma against female horror writers?
I wouldn't say that I suspect there's too much of a stigma. It's just that I think that the horror field has very traditionally been seen as sort of dominated by men. But I think especially in the last probably decade or a little more, there has been an explosion of small press publishers and publications that have just really opened the genre up. And so there are a lot of wonderful female authors coming out of that. And no, a lot of us are not afraid to get bloody when we feel like it. So I don't think it's as unusual as it might have once been.
Emily, real quick, I'm getting note that you sunk into the chair. I know this is a steampunk chair and you love it, but all you need to do is to stand up real quick, turn around, and then click on the chair again, and then you're sitting in the normal position. Here we go. Turn around, hover over the chair, and sit back down. I know the chair is almost like an airship. It wants to kind of take off. We'll do the same with questions for Nicole from the rest of the panel. But I do have one more about these sort of Lovecraftian or cosmic horror tropes, and you did an amazing job. I mean, I'm not an expert in the genre. I read a lot of Lovecraft, but there's so much stuff that is derivative of Lovecraft. Such a beloved genre. Were you afraid or concerned, and how did you deal with this if this was the case, that you would sort of repeat some of these tropes, right? Because I mean, Tidepool is the city and it's dark and the people are weird, in Small's Hello, but you succeed in having your very own tone at the same time as really hitting all those buttons that people who love cosmic horror, Lovecraft love. How do you? I mean, that you gotta wake up in the morning like with total anxiety and sweating, go like, oh my God, I'm just gonna repeat all this stuff. How do I not fall into these traps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a challenge when you're writing, is not to just regurgitate the same old storylines that everybody already has read 1,000 times over. So I was very conscious when I was drafting the book of, okay, there's tropes that, I enjoy myself, so I'm going to use that, but I'll just try to make that as vivid as possible. So, maybe you've seen spooky towns before with secretive people, but you've never seen a town like Tidepool, because that's my town, and I'm going to show you the specifics to this place and why it's different from what you've already read about. And also, whenever possible, I do try to subvert familiar tropes, and I try to hope that I'm playing with the audience's expectations at least a little. Like, they think, oh, I know what's going to happen here. And hopefully by the end of the book, they'll be thinking, oh, I didn't really expect that outcome. So, but I do try to play with that. Yeah.
Are there certain tricks? Because I have a music background, and I know a lot of people that I went to college with, they were really kind of paralyzed by, and this was before Google, they would sort of look look for things, and then they saw, oh, this is what I'm doing, so I'm not going to do anything. So I can see people who can get into sort of an obsessive rabbit hole by coming up with an idea, but then Googling and then finding a version of that idea and then not doing anything. Is there a way to where you could help someone like that, Nicole? I know you're not a psychologist, but if you were,
I guess I would
a
try
book
to.
shrink.
Oh boy, if that exists, I would not be one. Let me tell you. No, I would just
That's
say try
Sean's real life job. Sorry, day job.
I do make books smaller. Yes, that's true.
Oh, okay. Basically, I would just say try to, some familiar tropes, it's fine to use them. Just try to make them your own. Just try to create your own characters that maybe have a twist on, maybe like the chosen one who has surprise powers she didn't know about. Just try to do your best to bring out what scares you specifically, what inspires you specifically, and try to work that into your story. And I think it goes a long way to really individualizing a piece.
Mm, mm. But fishy lords from other worlds are always going to be fishy. That's just how it
Pretty
is.
much.
Yeah. It's like in jazz. I mean, if you have a diminished chord, you can play the diminished scale over it. There's no problem with that. That's how I see it. That was an inside jazz joke or comment, rather. Now, Sean, quickly, what question do you have for Nicole?
Well, first of all, that was an awesome reading, Nicole.
Thank
you
you.
and Emily both. So thanks, Drax, for making me go after both of them. I appreciate the putting me after the all-stars.
Oh, you don't even know what's coming next. We actually
good,
have
that's great.
Heloise the
Uh-oh.
Bard. She's gonna recite a poem. But go ahead.
But I was kind of thinking about Drax's question about, how do you know if something's funny earlier? How do you kind of gauge the creep factor as you're writing, right? Because is it do you have to spook yourself out in order to feel like something's appropriately creepy, or is there sort of a gauge that you use to figure that out?
Yeah, I do try to that was actually when I was working with somebody on this novel to try to bring it out. He did say just try to go in and try to think of what details would creep you out specifically, and try to use all your senses to bring that to life. What does it smell like? What does it sound like?
I like
what
that.
does the air feel like? Just try to really do whatever you can to bring it to life around you.
Yeah. For me, that would be something with eyes, like stabbing in the eyes or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Maybe you should do a Patreon thing where you write something for me, like for Draxter specifically, and then a Patreon, and then like just eyes gouging out. Okay, enough. Emily, question for Nicole.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about Lovecraft, but I'm interested in your other influences. Is there any other, even like particularly female or, I don't know, other horror writers that really inspire you?
Actually, a book that I had read I actually used it as a comp title when I was querying Tidepool was a book by Sherry Priest called Maplecroft, and it was a retelling of the Lizzie Borden story, but it was also cosmic horror, and she just did it beautifully. And so that was that. I love her horror writing anyhow. I don't know that she's primarily known as a horror writer. I think actually she's very famous for a steampunk series that she did, but she is someone whose horror inspired me a lot when I was writing Tidepool.
Folks, please, Nicole, if you could put this in the local chat, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
If you're just tuning in, we have, oh wow, the time is running. This show needs to be 3 hours long, but it isn't. If you're just tuning in now, you tuned in too late, so you have to watch the YouTube stream later. This is the Second Life Book Club, and on stage with me, Sean Gibson, Nicole Willson, Emily Wright from the Parliament House Press, that specializes in the brilliantly bizarre. And now, before Sean reads, we have a very special quick interlude. Sean's book is, as he indicated earlier, is narrated by a bard, Heloise, and the job of the bard in the book is to kind of provide a highlight reel about a adventure that has some mundane activity, let's put it that way, and the highlight reel is, of course, to to cement the legacy of the adventures and make everything sound really, really cool and exciting. And these four adventures, a dwarf hybrid elf, a rat, a person, and a rock monster, kind of like Sean. They go out with this dragon, and Heloise the Bard is here to sell the story. And I would like now to welcome on stage Shyla the Super Gecko, and she comes here with her lute. Where is she? There she is.
Mm.
Shyla is normally a gecko, but she dressed up as she envisioned Heloise. And so in the beginning of the book, Heloise is singing this song. We just have time for a little excerpt, but Shyla, please go ahead. This is a story, part of the story of what happened when these four adventurers go out to slay a dragon. And by the way, spoiler alert, the dragon is a vegan. Why is that not on the back of the book, Sean? I don't know.
Because it's a spoiler.
Oh, right.
Exactly
Oh,
why. Right, yeah.
oh. Sean gave me a job, or my wife a job, to blurb his book. I think that job is off the table now.
Yeah, next
Okay,
time
here we go.
I'll get your wife to blurb it next time.
Yeah, she doesn't spoil. That's the vegetables might. Okay, that's enough. Shyla, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Shyla, go ahead.
All
What are
right.
we hearing?
We're hearing the dirge of Skendrick, written in the key of persuasion. Take heed, my friend, for all in this life can be taken in a blink of an eye. When the bulk of massive red dragon rains fire and death from the sky. For so it has happened and is happening still in a town just like your own, where people are screaming and crying for aid as flesh is charred to the bone. Near Skendrick does a red dragon dwell, a beast who blots out the sun. He wheels in the sky and lets out mighty roars as he gobbles up babies for fun. Take up your swords, your axes, your bows, and use them in service to good. Though the day seems dark indeed, we must do what noble folk should. The dragon's treasure is legion, 10 feet high and wider than tall, and the brave heroes who slay him will lay claim to it all. The people of Skindrick are in dire need of champions to save their town, who will become heroes and legends before all is burned to the ground. The dragon soars and the dragon flies. When the dragon roars, everyone dies. Who will come to save the day? Who will boldly enter the fray? It may just be you.
Wow, big round of
Awesome.
applause.
That was fantastic. That was awesome.
Big round of applause for Shyla the Super Elf with her lute. And Sean, I mean, it's interesting that you did not really pursue a career in music.
It's interesting only insofar as my functional tone deafness would not have gotten me very far. But it's funny. Our audiobook reader, Haley Catherine, is a theater performer by trade. That is her profession, and we actually did record that song. A buddy of mine wrote the music for it, and it's
Awesome.
amazing. It is mind-blowingly amazing because Haley's an incredible singer. So that's actually on my website with all the proceeds going to a great charity called Impact Justice. So yeah, we had a lot of fun with that.
That's actually also on my sheet here. With let's address this right after your reading. Oh my God! I hope let me bribe the producers in the back channel that we can go over time a little bit. Sean, please stand up and read an excerpt. We have a scene from the bar, I believe. He's standing on the table. That makes a whole lot of sense. Of course.
No one should be concerned that I have no dangly bits because, like with me, rock giants have innies. It's okay.
Dangly bits in Second Life, they don't go well together.
That's right.
Okay, so
I fell off the stage.
You fell off the stage. Unbelievable. Stephen King was the last one who fell off the stage, and now you. Look at that. So I'm arranging the book display right in front of you.
I
Hold on.
wanted to
Here we
get
go.
closer to my adoring public. It just,
Of
it's like a rock
course.
concert, stepping in the
You,
front, maybe.
yeah, you don't need that front part where they have the security.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 5 of the book, and just to very quickly set the scene. So at the beginning, we learn that there's this dragon plaguing the town, or is it village, of Skendrick, and the town doesn't have any money to do anything about it, but they really need some help. So they decide that they're going to try to find some adventurers, and the lure will be, hey, this dragon's got a lot of treasure, so maybe we can get somebody to come. And it just so happens that there is a neophyte band of adventurers who are just starting out in their career together. And this is where we meet them. And I think we're only going to have time to get to a couple of them. But this will give you a feel for kind of the level of heroism that you're about to encounter. So, all right. Chapter 5 is called, Now, I'm Not Saying They Weren't Heroic, mind you. Bards smooth the rough edges of reality and make even the most bumbling idiots look like heroes. We like to think of ourselves as beacons of knowledge, illuminating every corner of the world by sharing insightful tales of the human condition. But really, we're just glorified ale sellers. Ultimately, our job is to entertain patrons whom the owners of the taverns in which we ply our trade would prefer to drink heavily. Each story has a comforting rhythm to it, a familiar cadence that soothes and lulls unsuspecting patrons into having a third, or fourth, or fifth ale. To do that, we obscure and ignore certain facts, particularly the mundane and boring parts of adventuring. With rare and generally perverted exceptions, no one wants to know how and where heroes pee, while taking a little creative license to jazz things up. In this instance, though, I think the boring and mundane parts are pretty entertaining, and you're still welcome to drink heavily while I tell it. The adventuring group that would eventually answer Skendrick's call for help was undeniably brave, but they were far from legendary, or even particularly experienced. In fact, the group had only recently come together through circumstances that, in and of themselves, would make for an interesting tale, though I'll save it for another occasion. That's right, printers, there's already a prequel ready and waiting for you. I'm the kind of woman who thinks ahead, or behind, I guess, and maybe occasionally about behinds, but only if they're really spectacular, and generally only if they're dwarven. I will, however, tell you about an incident that happened just before they took up the quest to slay the dragon, which will give you some idea about both the group itself and the adventuring life in general. Rumscrabble Tool Tinker, all 4 feet 9 inches of him, stood in the center of a public square in the city, not to be confused with the town, village, or townage, of Valenia, surrounded by a group of people not much smaller than himself. Unlike Rumscrabble, a very rare half-dwarf, half-halfling, quarterling? Those around him were human children, notwithstanding the presence of a few mothers. Of the children present, as opposed to people who just happen to be mothers standing near children who are not their own, which would be weird. Rummy, as he was known for numerous reasons, in addition to being shorter and easier to say than Rumscrabble, it also described his disposition and the generally spicy scent, not necessarily unpleasant, of his breath, held the rapt attention of his audience, who oohed and ahed at each new feat of prestidigitation he performed. Side note, I don't generally use a 2 gold piece word when a copper piece word will do, but in certain parts of Erythia, prestidigitation is the technical and professional term for sleight of hand tricks performed solely through non-magical means. Some street magicians are literally magicians, and their tricks and conjurations involve everything from simple environment-affecting cantrips to elaborate illusions. Others, however, generally less successful but no less abundant, rely solely on quick hands, nimble fingers, and misdirection to wow their audiences, and Rummy falls into that group. The only thing magical about him was his ability to consume liquor in quantities that would fell a Cormanthian yak beast and still be able to pull off a successful shell game, complete with snappy patter. I'm not sure I would even dare to get into a drinking contest with him. I think it was his rare genetic heritage. The dwarven side gave him a higher level of tolerance than most, and the halfling side gave him ample room to store it. I swear it's like they've got a hollow leg. It was easy to see why the children couldn't take their eyes off of Rummy. With his mutton chops, wiry goatee, sunny smile, dark brown skin, and a pair of golden, wire-framed spectacles perched on the bridge of his bulbous nose, he looked like your favorite uncle, just shorter, and his charisma was matched only by his deft sleight of hand skills. The children's mothers were no less enraptured, and Rummy worked both children and adults into his act, asking them to hold on to birds that disappeared beneath silk handkerchiefs, instructing them to draw cards that then showed up elsewhere later in the performance, and making them hold still while he pulled increasingly, and comically large, coins from their ears. An observant bystander might have noticed him performing a higher proportion of ear-pulling tricks with the mothers and lingering a bit longer with them than the children, and that bystander might assume that it was simply the behavior of a lascivious quarterling who had a thing for human women of a certain age. Rummy, however, was anything but a ladies' man, having rarely, if ever, shown any interest in the fair sex. His interest in the mother members of the audience was less lewd, lascivious, lustful, lecherous, or libidinous than it was financially motivated, or maybe larcenous. Incidentally, why are women the fair sex? What does that even mean? I resent the implication that because I lack a dangly part, I'm expected to be fair in any sense of the word. I mean, I am undoubtedly fair in the sense that my complexion, and if one takes fair to mean attractive, well, that's certainly true too, objectively speaking. I'm certainly not gentle, demure, or deferential, however, and goodness knows I'll just as readily punch someone, man or a woman, incidentally, in the crotch as I will in the face in the middle of a bar brawl. I'd suggest that we refer to women as the superior sex, but that would be sexist of me, albeit factually accurate. After concluding his performance with an astonishing feat that involved the apparent transformation of a pair of pigeons into a jar of cookies that was then passed around to a cheering audience of sugar-addicted kids, Rummy took a bow and sauntered on down the street. As he walked, an elven woman sidled up next to him and matched his pace, though neither looked at each other, and for a moment they walked in silence. The woman was tall and striking by human standards, with long blonde hair and pale blue eyes, though on the plain side by elven standards. She walked with the ease of someone who is confident in her ability to handle both the longbow slung over her shoulder and the very sharp sword that hung from her belt. She wore plain leathers, well cared for but worn with use, and her skin was freckled from long hours spent in the sun. As the pair turned a corner, the woman glanced over at Rummy and said, "How many?" "Ho! Whatever are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm straight asking how many mothers of young children you just robbed." Rummy shook his head and frowned. "Such an ugly word, robbed. That's something hoodlums do." He sniffed. "And what are you?" "An entertainer who simply collects payments for his performances in a discreet way that saves audience members the hassle of having to stand in line to purchase a ticket or the unseemly embarrassment of handing money over directly." "How many?" "There were 11 paying customers for today's performance, which I humbly submit was a very fine one." "Unwilling paying customers." "I would suggest we call them unwitting paying customers instead. Who's to say how they feel about it? It's entirely possible, given the thrills they experienced during the show, that they might have wished to pay even more than they unwittingly did. And they got cookies, so there's that." Nadinta Gettenwood shook her head, both exasperated and amused. "You didn't take too much, I hope?" Rummy shook his head vigorously. "Never, dear Natty. I love those wee lads and lasses, and I'd never take the food out of their mouths. A pittance! Far less in coin than received in pleasure," which apparently is the motto of the local house of ill repute. Nadinta frowned. "And how do you know that? We haven't even been here for a full day." "Only because I can read. Don't fret." Rummy pointed across the street to a sign with that very motto hanging from the balcony of a classy building that looked out of place in the rundown neighborhood through which they walked. "I assume that a place called the Soiled Peacock is a house of ill repute, anyway." He scratched his beard. "I suppose it could be a bathhouse for birds, in which case the motto might still be readily, if a bit less aptly, applied." All right, we'll stop there because I know we're over our time.
Sean, this is fantastic. This is Sean reading, and I couldn't help notice that a little calf was running up to you while you were reading. You probably didn't notice this. Looked at you. You looked at the calf. The calf then went the other way to the back of the room where Burgunda Gunderberger is waiting for you to hang out after the show. So again, as I'm contractually obligated to point out the difference between a fairly straightforward Zoom type video presentation of books and what we're doing here at the Second Life Book Club, it goes without saying that the latter is the superior format. Sean, this is fantastic. Quick question about the Impact Justice, because I have it on my run sheet here. Just give a big shout out to Impact Justice. This is a charity, or not, sorry, a nonprofit that you support, and they work on restorative justice. So some of the stuff that the revenue also of an ebook that you have out goes there. So I don't want to miss the opportunity to give them a big shout out. ImpactJustice.org, I believe. Why are you doing this? What are they doing, and why are you supporting them?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you mentioning that. So a quarter of the royalties from the book will go to Impact Justice, and then I mentioned we're selling the song that we heard such a beautiful rendition of here today on my website, and then also a sort of Dickensian holiday ghost story starring Heloise is available for sale, with all of the proceeds going to Impact Justice as well. And every time I put out a book, I like to pick some organization to donate to. This was sort of inspired by a friend of mine who passed away from cancer. She was a doctor, and she used to do these incredible missions. On her vacations, she would go to countries that were underserved by the medical community, and do like cleft palate surgeries on children. It was just this amazing contribution of her time and skills. And it was, how she used her free time, and she paid for her own way to go do that. And it was very inspiring. And she was such a sarcastic person that I was like, okay, if somebody this sarcastic can do something good with their skills, what can I do with mine? So I try to pick something each time I publish. And obviously social justice, racial equity has been a huge focus for all of us around the world over the past couple of years. And so that seemed like a great cause. And I talked to a number of people whose judgment I trust, and they turned me on to Impact Justice, which does a lot of great work to advance new ideas and solutions for justice reform. So that's why we're putting some money toward their great organization.
Awesome. It's basically what you learned, Sean, is cynicism bad, sarcasm good.
Exactly.
Why Elias says here, Sean's fast-paced reading reminded me of Groucho Marx in one of the classic films. So that's a great compliment. Sean, please sit back down if you will. You just have to hover over the chair. If you look at the chair, then you can hover over it. I want to end the hour, and we're going in our post game till the bottom of the hour, where people in world can ask questions. And if you're on the stream, and if you can't get in because we're full, try again. Maybe a person has left, and at the top of the show, at the end of the show, sometimes people leave. I should give Nicole and Emily the opportunity to ask a quick question of Sean. What questions do you have for Sean? That would be
Sean, I
unfair
was
if I...
dying to know who your influences were growing up, who you read, who your influences on your work are, because that was hilarious. I loved it. Really well written. I knew it was good, but I really enjoyed it. So
thank you. No, I appreciate that. It was funny. I mean, I grew up reading a lot of high epic fantasy. R. Salvatore is probably my favorite, but that generation of Tolkien and Terry Brooks and David Eddings and Raymond Feist. And I love that stuff, and it's wonderful. But I think we all know there's a certain sameness to the perspective of all that work, and it thank God we're seeing a lot more diversity of thought and points of view in the fantasy genre now, which is really exciting. But there's so much wonderful stuff that you can sort of lovingly make fun of, because it is really limited in its point of view, and kind of going back to the point about thinking about race relations, right? That's been a hot topic of conversation in fantasy in terms of the portrayal of certain races, right, and racial characteristics. So it was fun to take that stuff that I grew up reading and then marry it with that sort of Monty Python sensibility. And I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail for the first time in like 10 years recently, and was astonished to realize like how much of an influence that was, right? Like I was watching that going, wow, like this is the cadence, the pattern, the rhythm of the words was sort of imprinted on me as far as a comedy style, and that really came out here. So
cool. Thank you.
Emily?
I was gonna ask, do you play D&D?
I
Because
do.
so much of that feels D&D to me.
I do, and that's it's I love D&D. It's great, and I think the book is really like the book is sort of the representation of D&D. There's sort of the ideal like, okay, I'm going to play this fantasy adventure game where noble heroic things are going to happen, and I'm going to do great deeds. But most of the time, you end up sitting around a table like eating chips and telling poop jokes. And so that's really
in other words, your book.
Exactly. I mean, the book is essentially a 300-page version of what it's like for me to play D&D. It's kind of how it goes. So yeah. So I appreciate that question, and you were spot on.
Penny here in the chat, and by the way, people are mentioning these authors here in the chat, and I'm recording the chat so we have a record of it too with all the authors. I'll put them all together. Penny says you should have D&D in Second Life. By the way, just real quick, I did a video reportage about a guy from Australia, and it's titled Games Made in Second Life, and he actually makes D&D type games a whole bunch of tabletop games that you can play as an avatar. It's absolutely amazing. All the dice rolling and everything, and the people move. He has it all scripted out. But that's games made in Second Life. You can find that on YouTube. Last question here: the Parliament House. And by the way, big thanks to Mike Feeney, who does public relations for Parliament House, and he sent me the books on time. Wonderful to work with Mike. Parliament on the website says we work with our writers every step of the way on their literary journey. So this is now the opportunity for you guys um, to kiss a little butt here, because otherwise your next book won't be published and my show will be canceled. No, but
No.
seriously, I mean, this is so interesting to me to get a little, and I think for the audience to get a little glimpse of this, because a lot of authors also say, well, sometimes it's really cool to be associated with like this huge name. I don't want to name names, but some of them have said, yeah, that means absolutely nothing. They put it out and then the book just sort of dies. They don't really do anything for me, and I'm supposed to book my own hotel for the tour or whatever. So let's make a last round. How is it? Is this special or different, or what? How is it to work with these guys?
So far, they've been wonderful. This is my debut novel. I don't have a lot to compare it to, but they've been very helpful. They've responded very quickly to all the questions I've had, and boy, have I had a lot. So they've been very patient, and I've enjoyed working with the editors, and I'm absolutely in love with my cover. I was so thrilled when I opened that up. So I just wanted to tackle people on the street and make them look at it. So I've had a wonderful experience so far. Really have no complaints.
Was there an option? This is a question that the audience often asks. Was it an option for you to self-publish, or was that something that you didn't want to do?
I just really kind of wanted to go with the publisher. I have nothing against self-publishing. I could see myself doing it in the future, but I really wanted to go with the publisher for Tidepool, just because I don't necessarily want to do all the designing and book type putting together and everything. So I really wanted a publisher.
Mm-hmm. Emily, your experience, and this is, of course, just like Nicole said, when you're a debut author with your first book, and then, you may not have anything to compare it with.
Mm-hmm.
I compare this to when I was young and we were with the recording industry. We had nothing to compare with, and 25 years later, I realized that, well, there was some really bad stuff there, but you don't know. So,
Yeah.
Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, they've been awesome so far. They're super supportive, and the team is always there if I have questions or I'm freaking out about something and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, please help me. And then I also want to give a huge shout out to Shane, who runs the company and also designs all the covers,
Oh,
as far as I'm
wow.
aware.
Yeah.
That's
So
one person? Oh, cool.
yeah, she did mine, and I'm so in love with it. Every time I put it out on Twitter, it gets a ton of retweets from people I don't even know. So that's great. She's amazing.
That is actually really something. I don't know how I came across Parliament House, or somebody recommended it, or Twitter recommended it. But when you go on the website and you look at these covers alone, I mean, that is super appealing to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I encourage everyone to go there, and I mean, this is a huge part of a book, and a lot of authors also actually say, I have nothing to say about the cover, and sometimes I'm actually really not happy either. So that's cool that you said it. And Sean, what about you?
I've had a great experience, and I think it's a lot of fun to have dynamic publishers like the Parliament House active in the market, especially when you start getting into weirder or nichier kind of books. Like, there's not a huge market for comedic fantasy, but it's a fun market to be in. And so, there's opportunities with publishers like the Parliament House that there may not be with the Big Five. And Shane, as Emily said, is amazing. The whole team is great. Michael's great. Amanda's great. Mallory, everyone who works on the books is really great. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really good experience working with them, and I'm incredibly grateful for all the things that they've done to help get the book out that I would have been clueless or unable to do by myself, including connecting us to opportunities like this, which has been awesome. Drax, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for having us here. This has been great.
Absolutely, absolutely my pleasure. And big applause from the audience, please, for these wonderful authors. Let's wrap it up, and we have 15 minutes in the post game. People can stay here as long as they want. I mean, Second Life is like Hotel California, uh, as we know. Um, except for me, because I always now end with the thing where I'm in Europe right now with my two American refugees, and I got to go to bed early because my beauty sleep and my skin and all that kind of stuff. Nice moisturized skin. Big thank you to our wonderful guests. Big thank you to Mike Feeney from Parliament, who I interacted with, our wonderful book community here, and my wonderful team. And big shout out to Ruby, who put this together, who was the lead in putting this set together uh, based on the castle that was built by Solus. And also Silas Merlin, almost the same name, built the rock avatars. Really awesome job. We now have a tip jar here at the front. The sculpture that you can see here in the front, if the camera could pan on it, there's a tip jar, this reading Draxtor dragon, and all the tips, they go to my college fund. No, they don't. They go to the people who, they go to the volunteers, including Ruby and Shyla and a lot of other people who, um, on a volunteer basis, put this stuff together. So if you have a couple of Linden shekels to spare, just put them in there. In closing, I want to ask, and please put that in chat, folks, what are you reading? Uh, Authors also, please type it. We are running a little bit out of time. I want to give people in the room a chance to ask questions in voice. What are you reading right now? Put that in chat if you want. And please do pick up a book. I said it in the beginning. If we want books to survive and authors to survive, we need to pick up a book. And you don't have to read it. Just put it in that shelf there. Put it on that coffee table. Just buy the damn thing. No, you should also read it. Next week we have a very special panel. Next week we have a panel of Second Lifers. The title of that panel is "Writing as a Second Lifer." That has nothing to do with being in jail. That means we have four wonderful people who are longtime Second Life residents, but are also published authors. So that's going to be very interesting. We're going to be talking about if they draw from Second Life as an inspiration. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. We have, here we have stuff coming into the chat. Gapno is reading Courtier Newland, A River Called Time. Gapno, I'm so happy. This was a previous guest. Absolutely amazing. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much for watching, listening, and being here. And I'll see you guys all next week, right here on the Second Life Book Club.
Thank you so much, Drax and everybody.
Yeah, thank you.